Well, hello, and we want to talk a little bit about the tournament scoring system that I developed, and I've written a PDF that you can download. But I wanted to quickly outline some of the features of that system because they're re-releasing S4, Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, and they've said, the Wizards of the Coast Hasbro has said that they're going to include a tournament-style scoring sheet in with the re-release. And we want to compare that maybe with some of the older competition modules. I've actually never run C4 or C5 in competition, or C3, which I don't have, but we'll talk about. I have run C2 at tournaments back in the 80s and early 90s, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the scoring systems that were used in the past and how I built on that to make the scoring system that I'm presenting now. So I realize for a lot of people, the idea of competitive play in tabletop role-playing games is somewhat of a foreign concept. It's not something that happens even in terms of convention play all that frequently anymore. As I understand it, there was a period of time, probably the middle 2010s somewhere, that Dungeon Crawl Classics was still doing some sort of competitive play at tournaments. Whether or not that's still going on, I personally I don't know. So what we want to do is look back at some of the beginnings of tournament play, and what I'm going to bring up is the C or competition series of modules that was sold for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. C1 Hidden Shrine of Tomoeshin was the first of the modules that I remember that actually had the score sheet included in the module that you could go out and buy at the store. And the way they did it for that C1 module was it was all the different things that could produce a positive or negative score for the characters or the team was listed on one big sheet, and room by room you would go through it. If the party did or did not do something in that room that was scoreable, then you added or subtracted from their score as they went along. For C2, the way they did it was everything that was scoreable was included in the room description. So it was typical module of the day. You had a box text that is actually not meant to be read aloud necessarily. I know a lot of people took it that way. It's actually the stuff that's in the box text is really just the things that are supposed to be immediately perceivable by the players when they enter the area. So you don't have to read it to them verbatim. It just should be those are the things that they can see as soon as they enter the area, and they would have to explore or investigate to see some of the deeper things that are going on in the room that might be described later in the text. But then you would get through all the, what was the monsters, what was the treasure, and then at the bottom is the score. So anything that was scoreable then in that particular encounter room was listed per encounter, and you then, add or subtract from the score sheet and do it that way. And then came C3, and for C3, they did the scoring a different way. It was actually based on some articles that had been published in Polyhedron magazine, which was the publication by TSR for the Role Playing Game Association. And they had updated their scoring system, and that included a number of things, like if you completed your primary objective, your secondary objective, whether your character survived, how good the role playing was, how good the teamwork was, how well the players knew the rules, anything that happened as far as ingenious solutions to problems that they encountered along the way. It all had a scoreable element to it, and that was done on a 1 to 10 scale, as far as the referee then would score at 1 to 10, but those categories were weighted. So if you wanted your role playing to feature really heavily, then you would have a 1 to 10 score, but you would multiply that by 8 or 7 or something, a higher number like that. Whereas something that wasn't, if you wanted to de-emphasize things like rules knowledge, then perhaps you'd still have the 1 to 10 score, but your multiplier or your modifier would only be like times 2 or times 3. And when you got through all that, you could add it up to a total score. This was a system that I liked a lot more at the time because it, when you do it the way that they did it in C1 and C2, you're developing a scoring system for each and every module or adventure just for that adventure. And so there's so much effort that goes into it. You really would be much easier, you would think, to just do something that was more universalizable that you could use to rate play in any adventure that you took to a tournament. And that's what they started working on. For the Polyhedron articles in 1983. They updated that in 1987. For the most part, because when you're at a tournament, the players in particular, it's 3 to 4 hour sessions, and they probably have something scheduled right as soon as the session ends. So they're flying across, the venue to get to the next, whether it's another tournament game or just a regular convention game or it's a presentation that they really wanted to hear. And so, to ask them to sit there and fill out long and involved elaborate score sheets was just not working out well. So they went with a kind of a 1 to 5 system where 5 was the highest, 1 was the lowest, but you just sort of circled the number. And what they did though is we're not just anymore just rating the judge, the referee. You're also providing some sort of recommendation or nomination for your fellow players. So you can pick out, these elements again, like, if you want to emphasize things like role play, then who was the best role player? Well, everybody nominates who they thought the player was that was the best role player. And if the majority of the players are sort of naming the same person, then you pull them out for a special mention. They don't necessarily get any more prizes or anything like that, but at least they get some acknowledgement for things that they contributed to the game. So now let's kind of look very briefly at my PDF, and then we'll follow it up by just a closer look at the forums. So I don't want to get carried away with doing a long video because a lot of times the videos that I have where I've got a PDF downloadable element to it, the percentage viewed is not very high. I'd like to think that's because my forms are pretty self-explanatory, or if I've given some additional explanation text that's sufficient to explain to people exactly how you're supposed to use these things. So this is the PDF that you can look at. Got a nice little cover to it. This is all kind of public domain art that I've taken from old books on medieval history and that sort of thing. Table of contents, then what we have is the introduction, very briefly, then we'll give it a section about the tournament setup. This is selecting a venue and different things you have to take into consideration to prepare for it. Then we'll talk about the tournament best practices. So these are the kind of ideals that you want to put forward when you're doing it. Selecting your pacing. Talk about a little bit about awards and prizes that you might have available to you through sponsorships or what have you. Then we'll talk a little bit about the adventure best practices, and this would be different ways that you should write. There were different ways you should think about writing adventures for tournaments. You got to remember this is a lot different than a home game. You have very strict limits, so even if you think about a one shot as not just that it's one adventure instead of a series of adventures in a campaign, this is literally a hard limit of probably 3 to 4 hours. And for most of the players, you want to write these adventures with the assumption that they will finish when it's over. I mean, some people are not going to finish, and that might be fewer points for them as far as scored total. But you want to write the adventure so that the majority of people are going to finish, and that's a really big thing with these adventures. Is long before you ever get them to the tournament, you really need to write them out and then play test them with people who are they're not going to be at the tournament, because you don't want it to be things that they're familiar with. Then talk about using pre-generated characters at tournaments, which is a really good practice. That way you can set things up to be equal for everyone, and you can control kind of the equipment that they have distributed to them, whether you put it on each player or you give them their basic equipment per per character, and then give them a little list of things that they can put together as far as choosing. Oh, I want this, you want that. We talk a little bit about make sure they have time to talk to each other before the start of play about their characters and what their backgrounds are and what they're bringing to the table, and then just a little bit about a tournament wrap up. And then last thing we'll do before we get talking about the sheets, there's also an appendix in here that would talk about kind of like a tournament of champions, which would be you've got each tournament will have some winners at the end. A couple of rounds, if you think about it, like half the players advance into the second round from the first round, and then from there you get maybe one table that comes out as the victorious team, or you've got maybe a handful of players that have a score that's at the top for after all the rounds have been completed. But you're really not going to get more than 2 or 3 rounds in most tournaments, especially if they happen at a convention where it's happened over a weekend. If you think about it, you've got these 3 to 4 hour sessions. You've got to leave time for meal breaks and that sort of thing. You're really only going to get 2 rounds in maximum in a day. So if you have like maybe a Friday night round and then 2 Saturday round, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and then potentially a morning round, you could maybe fit in that way 4 rounds, but you're not going to get an afternoon round on the last day because you still got to do like the awards ceremony and recognition for people who aren't necessarily the winners but got like special mentions along the way. So Tournament of Champions is this is just a thought experiment at this point. It's not really a suggestion that is meant to be implemented through this resource. But the idea would be that for each tournament where they had champions, if you could get a group of people that's reliably going to all these tournaments, or they've got they show up to a minimum number of scored tournament games, they might be able to compete for one big tournament at the end where it's just by invitation only, people who have won from different previous rounds, that sort of thing. Anyway, just an idea. And then the last idea is there was an article in Dragon Magazine in August of 1979 that talked about Dungeon Master player levels. And this was literally levels that you would get for playing or dungeon mastering games of Dungeons and Dragons and also other games. And there's always that joke of like, what level dungeon master are you? Well, this article kind of set forth some rules for how you might get a level as a dungeon master. I don't think it's in and of itself workable, but I do like the idea of being able to quantify the experiences we have both as players and as game masters, and not just, it was kind of silly in the sense that it really just paralleled the kind of level advancement that our characters go through in these games, which isn't really producing anything useful to the player. What you want to get at is the breadth of experiences that different players have had, and not to lord it over each other, but to really get into, these players kind of are interested in playing games like me, whether that's I do exploration, or I like the combat, or I like the role playing, or I like all three. If there was a way to look at that quantitatively, it would be a way to, one, I think, open up to playing with more people that you don't necessarily know, and that's kind of something that's cool about tournament situations. Is a lot of times you get there, I mean, maybe a lot of team tournaments you could like know the whole team that you're with and you advance as a team, but a lot of these individual tournaments you'd never really played with these people. Maybe you've met them at different conferences or conventions, that sort of thing, but you may never have had an opportunity to play with them until one time you both entered this tournament and end up at the same table because that's the way the luck of the draw went. And it's kind of fun to see the way different people approach things that way. And then lastly, what we wanted to do is just go back to look at the forums. And so we've got the referees form. You got the score, which is going to be 1 to 10, and each one of these will have a multiplier. I didn't add that in the way the original articles for the RPGA were done, because you might want to do things differently. You might want to weight one score higher than what they suggested. And anyway, then you'd get a total. You'd add all that up to a front side total. And then there's also this back side where the referee is contributing a score based on some of these categories that the players are also going to vote on, but it's just the overall rank, best decision moments, most heroic moment, and then best role-playing moments. And you would rank, maybe you rank the 3 highest or the 4 highest or just the highest. Each one of these things. Now, I'm given the way I've done it was not the way it was done originally. Gives the referee a chance to add on some bonus points to their score if you're scoring individually. But then you also have this form for the players, and they have a very similar set of scoring categories on the front side. The only difference would be where the referee looks at teamwork on the party side. The players would vote on the referee's entertainment value, because you can't really vote the individual referee as having teamwork as a team of one in that sense. But here this is the player forum where they also have a chance to look through all the players that they played with, and if they, again, you could just the highest, and they would vote, one person on each one of these things, so you just put an X in the box, or you could vote like the 3 or 4 highest. So you go through all the different categories and all the different players that you played with, and you put 1 in a box, 2 in a box, 3 in a box, whatever. This is something it's going to take time between rounds to score that, so that's why it's easier if you just do it. The majority of the players vote, and you just take the highest one. But then the last form is also going to be the form that's meant for the tournament director, and they've got the ability then to tally up all the players' scores for the referee, and then get a final referee score, and then all the scores for the different players, and then on the backside, kind of the same setup there as the players form, so that they can go through and figure out if they have to award somebody for the 4 nomination categories, which is best overall, best decision, most heroic moment, and best role player. And there's some notes on how to fulfill all these things. Did they complete their primary objective, finish the adventure? If there's secondary objectives involved, did they complete those? If so, did they get like 1 of the 4 secondary objectives, or 3 of the 4, or 4 of 4? And then some final things as far as this is a per round form, so if it's team advancement, that's going to be no, doesn't mean anything bad. If they are advancing as a team, then that team advances. But if it's no because it's individual players, then say there were 8 players in the party, you've got room to advance half of them, so you could say these 4 players are going on to the next round, kind of thing. And that's really it. I'm going to put the forum obviously up here for download, and there's also some additional readings and some references at the end of the written portion of the PDF. So if you want to read some more of these polyhedron and dragon articles, you can dig back into the old historic resources, and I've left some breadcrumb trails to figure out where they are. And anyway, I think that's it for now. If it catches on, then I might do another video talking more about filling out the forms or whatever anybody's interested in. But until then, I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.